Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Mokwariola. Have you ever imagined not being able to fill out a form at the hospital or figure out how to cast your vote in an election or send a text message to a loved one because you aren't able to read or write? Well, that is the reality for 1 in every 5 people around the world. Having missed out on learning how to draw straight lines as a child and lacking the capacity to process information as an adult, everyday tasks can become challenging for the uneducated to effectively carry out, leaving individuals and communities at the risk of being left behind politically, economically, and socially. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on the state of education and literacy in Africa? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
Literacy is understood by many as the ability to read, write, and demonstrate arithmetic skills. It has been expanded to include the ability to use language, numbers, images, computers, and other basic means to understand, communicate, gain useful knowledge, and use the dominant symbol systems of a culture. When TVC visited the National Library of Nigeria, there were indeed activities by the managers to commemorate the day. But findings showed that there were only a few people reading the books here, with most of the books covered up in dust. In an interview with TVC News, one of the librarians said the literacy level in the country can't improve if citizens fail to use libraries.
Libraries is where we have, we can call libraries an archive of knowledge, where we have the information about what is going on in the country, information about students' education. But when we look at it, libraries are being abandoned. Students only read once they have exams. And once they finish the exams, that's all. Without library, I don't think there's any improvement. So people that come to the library, they find themselves in a new world.
According to a research conducted by UNESCO, digital technologies are fundamentally changing the way people live, work, learn, and socialize everywhere. But those who lack access to digital technologies and the knowledge, skills, and competencies required to navigate them can end up marginalized in increasing digital societies.
In the African world, the literacy has been on decline. People are not reading. So that is why we even did some exhibition, to remind people of the importance of literacy and also to, create awareness so that our readers will know what is happening. I believe the theme is apt. It's supposed they did it, to align with what is happening in the society now. Now through the internet, mobile phones, and all whatnot is fast moving in technology. Almost everybody is aligned to it.
The International Literacy Day reflects on the various challenges preventing the promotion of literacy as an integral part of lifelong learning within and beyond the 2030 education agenda.
Every year, September the 8th is set aside by United Nations to celebrate progress made with literacy and chalk out ways to reach new learners. Despite progress in recent years, large inequalities remain, notably in African countries like Burkina Faso, Niger, and South Sudan, where literacy rates are still below 30%. Joining me in the studio on Africa Today, I have Taiwo Hassan, Coordinator, Education Rights Campaign in Nigeria. And on Skype, I have Dr. Bonnie Norton, a distinguished scholar of the Department of Language and Literacy Education at the University of British Columbia in Canada. Good to have you both on the program.
Thank you. Good evening.
Now, let's begin with you, Taiwo. Learning, we understand, is a fundamental right. And according to UNESCO, about 38% of African adults are illiterate, and 2/3 of that number are said to be women. But in your own capacity, how would you assess the level of literacy in Africa today?
I think it's abysmal. And it's a complete, because when you look at it, in the year 2000, there was that global effort towards eradicating literacy across the world. And a lot of African countries and governments keyed into that. But 15 years after, in 2015, Nigeria and a lot of other African countries were unable to meet the education for all goals. Today, you have across Africa a situation whereby a good chunk of the adult population are illiterate. When you go to the youth literacy rate, it is even bigger. So that for me, I think that since 2000, there has been a very slow progress. In fact, according to statistics, between 1990 and the year 2006 or 16, which is about 26 years, Africa was able to increase its literacy rate only by 10%, from 65% in 1990 to 75%. And you must ask the question that if for 26 years we could only increase by 10%, how long will it take us in Africa to ensure that we reach the stage of Cuba, where there is almost 100% literacy? There's a lot that still needs to be done. But for that to happen, there must be increased funding. There must be more government interest in investing in public education, because private education can never take us out of the woods. In Nigeria today, we have possibly a lot of private primary and secondary schools, and yet we parade statistics that shows progression in the literacy rate.
Which is quite worrying.
It's quite worrying because the question of access is very important. You could have a whole lot of schools, but they are charging high fees. It means that vast majority of the population will not be able to afford it. So that the question of literacy rate is about accessibility. It's about functional education that is free, that is qualitative, and that is accessible to the vast majority of the population. And that must be the goal of governance, otherwise we will not get it right.
Yes, indeed. I quite agree with you there, because a public institution should not be thrown aside, because that's really a key for the masses to be fully educated. But let me quickly come to you, Dr. Borton. What factors would you say contribute now to the low literacy levels recorded on the African continent?
Well, you know, interestingly, the Education for All movement did try to promote education to increase education for youngsters. And what we found is that there were increased numbers of children in school, but that wasn't matched by the quality of education. So the class sizes increased, and you do have almost full attendance at the early years of elementary school, but you just have very large classes that make learning difficult. And so what we find is that the Education for All Global Monitoring Report of 2013-14 has found that more than 1/3 of children are out of school by grade 4. So you can imagine that's a huge loss of human potential.
Right.
And only 40% of children in grade 4 achieve minimum reading standards. So the issue there is largely, it's an issue of poverty, because you have very large classes and teachers struggling to bring quality education to these large classes. There are ways in which one can be very creative in addressing this, and I hope we can talk about that later. But in the end, what we are looking at is poverty and the lack of teachers, limited numbers of teachers, and limited numbers of schools where teachers can actually teach. So in the end, we can increase attendance at school, but unless it is accompanied by quality and more teachers and more schools, you're going to run into difficulty.
All right, now let me quickly bring in this question now. You've mentioned poverty as one of the probable cause for literacy levels in Africa, but in this present generation, we believe that, you know, Africans have a choice or have a means to, you know, rise up to the occasion and be independent, you know, devoid of being reliant on other international communities for aid. But in a nutshell, would you say that poverty is the actual cause? Don't you think perhaps culture, tradition, and other factors could have played a role here to, contribute to the level of literacy level on the African continent?
Well, I'm not sure if that question is addressed to me, but one thing I do know is that wherever I've worked in Africa, parents want their children to learn. Education is a huge priority for African parents in every single community I've ever attended. So the issue is not really that parents are not interested or that they're problematic cultural practices. Sometimes parents have to make very difficult decisions about which children go to school, because often, even though they're supposed to be free schooling, often there is funding associated with that, and they have to decide which kids are actually going to go to school. So what is my research suggests is that parents want their kids to learn, they are passionate about learning, but often have to make hard choices about how they use the limited resources that they have.
All right, I will come back to that matter, but we need to go on a very quick break. You're watching Africa Today, and we're looking at the state of education and literacy in Africa. We've got more discussions in a bit. Stay with us. "50 years ago, about 25% of young people between the ages of 15 and 24 couldn't read or write a simple sentence, compared to the 10% today. And according to a latest data from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, about 750 million adults remain illiterate, out of which most of them are women. Now, Dr. Borton, before we went on break, raised some salient issues on the questions I asked. But my particular concern is the way the girl child, take for instance, in the northern Nigeria, isn't given the opportunity to be educated because of, religion religion, so to speak. Because if you look at it, apart from the northern Nigeria, some other countries in Africa do not see the education of the girl child as important. So in other words, poverty in this case might not be the only cause to this. So how can we change this practice that has been in the system for so long, despite, parents, or despite the need to educate everyone at all levels, across all gender?
For me, I think the first way to understand this complex process is to go back to pre-independence Africa. When I say pre-independence Africa, I'm talking of deeply agrarian societies where every child must be involved in agriculture, which means that for parents, the children are producers of wealth, and you don't want to release them out for education. So because you need them on the farms. And you had a situation in the 50s and 60s whereby in the Western region, for instance, government, through a whole lot of effort, was able to get parents to key into the educational and mass literacy program of the government at that time to enroll their children in school. So that we need to go back to how was that done? Because how I think it was done was that parents were made to understand that getting education would mean social progress. It will mean economic benefit for the children. But if we continue to parade the situation where we have today, whereby going to school does not mean you are going to have jobs or you are going to have any social progress, then there's no way you can convince those in the north that the girl child needs to be educated. So that for me, government needs to go back to what was done in the past. And that means, first and foremost, a campaign to get the parents to key into the mass literacy program, but also to ensure that education is linked with economic benefit. Because ultimately, education is not supposed to just ensure that individuals know how to read and write and all of that. But how do they contribute to society's progress? And how are they able to take care of their own needs through that? But you have a disconnection. You have a situation whereby education, for instance, at this level, is organized in such a way that there's enormous burden on the poor parent. And then when people graduate, either from secondary schools or from the universities or polytechnics, there are no jobs waiting for them. Because you must understand that 2017 is different from the 1950s. So that even in the north, we have had a whole lot of progress made culturally in terms of people understanding the role of education. But you have a disconnection because people are not able to see government ensuring that those who even labor to go to school are able to derive economic benefit from it. And where we do not do this, we will not be able to break that cultural and religious beliefs that continue to hold a whole lot of people into that trap of ignorance. And without this, we will not also be able to resolve all of the issues of Boko Haram, and terrorism that is ravaging the north at the moment. So it's a whole lot of task that is for the government in terms of girl-child education.
All right, let me quickly come to Dr. Bornie Norton. How do we bridge the gap now, catching up with the technological and digital world in terms of readership pattern and culture in Africa?
Well, the good news, Esther, is that Africans are already doing this. One of the projects that I've been working on for the last 4 or 5 years is called the African Storybook. And this is an online digital platform, a website that provides open access, free stories in multiple African languages, as well as English, French, and Portuguese. So people, this is the organization who's established this is SADI in South Africa, and they've seen that technology can be revolutionary. And to reach out to African communities, both rich and poor, through digital means, you can actually provide resources for children, girls and boys, young and old, to actually become literate. So I know your program is very interested in proffering solutions, and what I was hoping to do on this program is to demonstrate that there are people, there are organizations who have tackled this in the most amazingly innovative way. There was, in fact, the Pan-African Literacy Conference that just finished a couple of weeks ago in Abuja, and there was great excitement around the African Storybook. And the issue being, because all the materials are free and open access, you don't have to be wealthy to be able to access these stories. And there can be innovative partnerships between governments and schools and industry to ensure that materials do reach classrooms and do reach those who can make most use of those. And many of those stories are tackling issues of perhaps discrimination against the girl child. There are stories that show that young girls can and are productive, exciting members of our society. So this is partly how we tackle issues around girl education, through the stories that people hear, through the pedagogy that teachers use in classrooms, through the knowledge base that parents bring to education. I think we can do that partly, at least, through the innovations of technology.
All right. Now, Mr. Hassan, let's look at the non-formal education sector, non-formal education. How much of a role do you think that can contribute or help boost the level of literacy in Africa today?
Yeah, it's actually the most important area to look at, because when you're talking of illiteracy in Africa, you're talking of entire generations that have missed several opportunities to be educated. Both those between the ages of 15 and 24, some 10, 30 years or 20 years ago, who didn't have the opportunity, but they are still around today and they can still be engaged. But unfortunately, in Africa, there is not so much attention around this. And where there is attention, there's not so much effort to ensure that the programs, actually, benefit. There's corruption also involved, because if you look at Nigeria, for instance, as an example, apart from the universal basic education, which is formal, you have a whole lot of non-formal agencies that are supposed to drive the process of ensuring that those who can't
get the education that
is required. But what is happening? I mean, we must begin to investigate all of these things, because the National Open University is at a higher level. But you have NIMEC, you have NINEC. Both are for non-formal education. But how much monies are voted for these agencies? And how do you ensure that these agencies are actually performing their functions? In a whole lot of ways, it is not impossible to reach those we need to reach. I mean, for instance, market women, Okada riders, who didn't benefit from formal education, how do you ensure that you're able to provide them, given their schedule as economic agents, trying to make a living? How do you ensure that you are able to ensure that they get education? These are the challenges before government. But what you see in a lot of ways is that even where monies are voted for some of these agencies, the results do not commensurate to the resources that are voted. And I think that if we want to get it right in Nigeria and Africa, we need to go back to what was done in Cuba. And I mention Cuba not because I completely agree with the system existing in Cuba, but in 1960 and 1961, there was a mass literacy campaign in Cuba which ensured that within the next 10 years, the literacy level in that country was reversed so much that several decades after, you could talk about nearly 100% literacy level in Cuba. And what was done? Literacy brigades were sent into rural areas, not just to educate people, but to set up the school structures, you know, to ensure that, because education is not just about telling people the benefit of education. You also need to put up the structures that can encourage people to come in, you know, and benefit from that education. And after they are done, there must be processes to ensure that, you know, they derive the advantage from all of the processes they have gone through. And this does not exist in Nigeria at the moment, which is why we continue to parade horrible statistics when it comes to literacy level. So that for me, I think that there must be renewed government attention, because now we are starting on a new slate. 2015, Nigeria failed to meet the Education for All goals. There's a new effort globally, you know, 2030, the SDG 4. How do you ensure that by 2030, Nigeria will count as one of those countries who have met this goal? This must be the new priority for governance at this level.
All right, let me quickly come to you, Dr. Bortun, before we wrap up the end of the show. What governmental educational policies would you recommend now for the future?
Well, you know, I think that government has to work in partnership with teacher education institutions, because in the end, the education of teachers is at the interface between the government and the schools. So I think if you have good, strong partnerships where the government, in a sense, listens and respects the teachers, and the teachers listen to and respect government, and we have strong partnerships, I think that's the best way forward. And I agree with Mr. Hassan that if you look at Cuba, there was a huge revolution in literacy in Cuba, because in a sense there was a common vision and a common goal for the future, where the resources of the country were harnessed in the best interests of the population, and certainly children in particular.
All right, let's leave it at that for now. I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Ronnie Norton, Distinguished Scholar of the Department of Language and Literacy Education at the University of British Columbia in Canada. Thanks a lot. And as well, Taiwo Hassan, Coordinator Education Rights Campaign in Nigeria. It's a pleasure to have your thoughts on the program. Now, evolving from its earliest form to an advanced model, education has grown to become a solid foundation for civilization and everyday life, with digital technologies changing the way people learn, work and socialize everywhere. For Africa to catch up with the rest of the world, literacy must be used as a tool to close the gap on inequality, empower the mind and help people climb up the stairs of sustainable development. And that is our package for today. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG. And also follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one, I am Esther Mokwariola, and always remember, change starts with you.